The diner sat at the edge of town, its neon sign flickering against the fading evening light. Inside, the smell of grilled cheese and coffee hung thick in the air, a comforting scent for strangers and locals alike. For David, a single dad trying to stretch every dollar, it wasn't a place he visited often, but tonight was special. His daughter had insisted they stop after school, her wide eyes and soft pleas too innocent to refuse. They slid into a booth by the window, the cracked leather seats, sign beneath them. David's daughter pressed her palms together, as if holding a secret she could no longer keep. The waitress appeared then, a young woman with gentle eyes and a smile that seemed to belong more to a friend than a stranger. She greeted them warmly, balancing her notepad against her palm. There was a softness about her, the kind that invited trust, and in that moment, David's daughter leaned close to her, cupping her small hands around the waitress's ear. It was a secret whisper between child and adult, a fragile truth too tender to be spoken aloud. Whatever his daughter said made the waitress pause, her expression flickering with surprise before softening into something like understanding. She bent down, brushed the girl's hair from her forehead, and nodded gently as if to promise she would keep what she had been told safe. David, sitting across from them, felt a strange stirring in his chest. He didn't know what his daughter had said, but he saw the way the waitress's eyes lingered on the little girl with an affection that seemed too genuine to be part of her job. For a moment, it was as though the three of them belonged together in that booth, their laughter echoing softly against the clinking dishes and hum of conversation around them. The meal arrived, simple but warm, and the waitress checked on them more often than she did with others. She noticed when David's daughter struggled to reach the syrup, and she noticed when David's tired eyes drifted toward the clock, calculating the hours he had left before work began again in the morning. There was a kindness in the way she filled in the gaps, making the evening easier without making him feel as though he was failing. Yet, while this new bond formed quietly over plates of pancakes and fries, another set of eyes lingered from the counter. The diner's manager leaned against the register, his arms crossed, his expression sharp. He had worked alongside the waitress for months, perhaps years, and his admiration for her was no secret among the staff. But tonight, his eyes narrowed as he watched her linger too long at the booth by the window. His jaw tightened when her laughter mingled with the giggles of a child who wasn't her own. David didn't notice. His focus remained on his daughter, who seemed brighter, happier than she had in weeks. He wondered what secret she had entrusted to this stranger and why it had given her such peace. The night ended with a quiet thank you and a promise from his daughter that they would come again. As they left, David glanced back once. The waitress was still watching them, her expression unreadable, caught somewhere between longing and caution. Behind her, the manager's disapproving gaze followed them out into the night. It was the beginning of something fragile and unspoken, a bond formed not by choice but by circumstance, one that carried with the weight of secrets, kindness, and eyes that would not stop watching. The following week brought heavy rain, the kind that painted streaks across the diner's windows and filled the night with a rhythmic tap of water against glass. David hadn't planned on stopping by again so soon, but his daughter had begged. She spoke of the diner not for the food, but for the waitress who had listened to her in a way that even he, her father, sometimes struggled to do. Reluctantly, he gave in, pulling their worn jackets tight as they hurried inside, dripping and laughing. The waitress spotted them instantly. Her face lit up with the kind of smile that wasn't rehearsed, one that came from seeing someone she was truly glad had returned. She guided them back to the same booth, as if it had quietly become theirs. David noticed how his daughter leaned closer, her small shoulders relaxing in the presence of the stranger who was slowly becoming more than that. Meals were ordered, but the food was never the highlight. Between trips to other tables, the waitress found small moments to sit beside the little girl, coloring on a napkin or listening intently to her stories about school. David watched from across the booth, surprised at how natural it looked. His daughter had always been shy, hesitant to open up, but here she was, filling the space with words and laughter. For David, there was something quietly humbling about it all. He had tried so hard to be both father and mother, to fill every role his daughter needed. But here was someone who, without effort, provided comfort in ways he could not. He wasn't jealous. If anything, he was grateful. Still, there was an ache in his chest, a reminder how alone he had been for so long. But not everyone saw their presence the same way. From behind the counter, the manager's eyes never left him. He polished glasses that were already clean, his attention fixed on the waitress, as though he could will her back to him with the weight of his stare. She had always been kind, always given more than the job required. But this was different. This was personal. and he didn't like it. As the night stretched on, the waitress learned more about David. She noticed the calluses on his hands, the exhaustion in his posture, the way he counted change carefully before paying. She didn't judge him for it. Instead, she saw the quiet strength in his sacrifices, the way he poured everything he had into his daughter without expecting anything in return. Her admiration grew, though she never said it. It lingered in the way she refilled his cup before he asked, in the way she slipped an extra cookie onto the plate for the little girl, pretending it was a mistake. These small acts, unnoticed by most, were not lost on David. He felt them deeply, though he struggled to understand what they meant. By the time the rain had stopped, and the streets outside glistened under the glow of street lamps, David's daughter clung to the waitress's hand, reluctant to leave. It was in that moment that David realized something had shifted. The waitress wasn't just someone serving food. She was becoming a part of their story, piece by piece. But just as quickly as the warmth grew, so did the shadow behind it. The manager stepped forward as they left, his eyes cold, his jaw set. To him, this wasn't just kindness, it was betrayal. And he silently vowed that he would not allow it to continue unchecked. The days that followed were filled with quiet tension, though David and his daughter remained unaware of it. To them, the diner had become a small refuge, a place where life's heaviness seemed to lift, even if only for an hour. The waitress's kindness had become a thread woven into their routine, and for David's daughter, it was something close to magic. But behind the counter, unseen storms were beginning to form. The manager had noticed the subtle changes in her. The way her eyes softened when she looked at the little girl, the way her laughter carried differently when David was near. To him, it was not just a matter of affection, but a loss of control. He had always believed she would eventually see him, standing there in the background, loyal and waiting. Yet, with each visit from the single father and his daughter, he felt her slipping further away. One evening, when the rush had ended and the booths were nearly empty, he cornered her by the kitchen door. His voice was low, but sharp, words carrying the weight of warning. He reminded her of the job, of the importance of boundaries, of how others might see her spending too much time with one customer. Though his words were framed of concern, they carried something darker, a possessiveness she had long ignored but could no longer dismiss. The waitress walked away shaken, her hands trembling as she tried to pour a cup of coffee. She knew his feelings for her had lingered unspoken for years, but now they pressed against her like a wall, suffocating and unyielding. Still, when David and his daughter entered that night, she straightened her shoulders and greeted them with the same warmth as always, refusing to let the shadows reach the table by the window. David noticed, though. He saw the faint hesitation in her steps, the way her eyes darted toward the counter when she thought no one was watching. He wondered if she was simply tired, or if something deeper weighed on her heart. His daughter, too, sensed a change. The little girl leaned closer, whispering again, sharing words only the waitress could hear. And though the waitress smiled, David caught the flicker of unease in her gaze. That night, as they left, David lingered near the door. For the first time, he realized that what was unfolding between them was not just kindness. It was connection. And connections, especially ones that stirred the heart, often came with complications. The manager watched from his usual post, arms crossed, eyes dark. To him, David was more than a customer. He was a rival, one who had entered quietly and begun to claim what the manager believed was his. And as the door swung shut behind the father and daughter, the manager made a silent promise to intervene before the bond grew any stronger. The waitress, wiping down the table they had left behind, felt the weight of that promise in the air. Though no words had been spoken, her heart ached with both fear and hope. Fear of what might come if she continued down this path, and hope for what it might mean if she did. The following week felt heavier than the last. The diner, once a safe place of warmth and laughter, now carried an undercurrent of unease. David noticed at the moment he walked through the door. The smiles were still there, the laughter from his daughter still rang through booths, but something about the way the waitress moved told him that she was carrying a burden she didn't dare share. Her steps were careful now, guarded, as though she was measuring every interaction. She no longer lingered at their booth for as long as before. Her conversations were shorter, her glances quicker, as though she feared the eyes that followed her every move. And those eyes, belonging to the manager behind the counter, had grown sharper, more possessive, and more openly hostile. David pretended not to notice at first, but his instinct as a father and as a man told him otherwise. He watched the way the manager's gaze burned holes in the back of the waitress's apron, the way his lips tightened each time she bent near the table to listen to his daughter's whispered secrets. The tension was so thick it seemed to cling to the walls of the diner, and David wondered whether their presence was a cause of her unease. One evening, when the rain once again fell heavy outside, the truth became impossible to ignore. The waitress brought them their meals with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. David's daughter giggled as she shared another secret, but David saw the stiffness in the waitress's posture, the faint tremor in her hands as she set down the plates. Across the diner, the manager's glare was unrelenting, his jealousy no longer hidden. David felt a tightening in his chest. He realized that their visits, innocent as they were, had put the waitress in a difficult position. She had been nothing but kind, and yet that kindness had stirred resentment in a man who believed he had a claim to her heart. David knew he could not allow his daughter to remain in the middle of such silent warfare, yet leaving felt impossible. His daughter's attachment to the waitress had grown too deep, and he himself could no longer deny that his feelings had begun to change too. That night, as they prepared to leave, the waitress walked them to the door. Her smile was small, fragile, as though it might break under the weight of everything she could not say. David caught her eyes for the briefest of moments and saw the truth reflected there, a mixture of gratitude, longing, and fear. It was enough to confirm what he had suspected. The bond they had formed was real, but it was under siege. The manager stood close by, his presence looming like a shadow. His jaw was set, his hands clenched, and though he said nothing, the warning in his stare was clear. David guided his daughter out into the night, the rain soaking through his jacket, but his mind was far from the storm outside. For the first time, he knew he could no longer remain passive. Whatever was unfolding between them was more than chance, more than fleeting kindness. And if it meant standing against jealousy, suspicion, or even danger, then he would have to decide where he truly stood. The storm outside raged through the night, but inside David's heart, another storm brewed. He could no longer ignore the truth. The waitress had become a part of their lives, her kindness binding her to his daughter in a way that neither distance nor disapproval could undo. Yet, with every glance from the manager, David knew they were walking on fragile ground. The next morning, his daughter tugged at his sleeve, asking to return to the diner once more. He hesitated, but he saw the hope in her eyes, the kind that only a child could hold. She had found comfort there, and perhaps even a sense of family. So, despite the weight pressing down on him, David agreed. When they arrived, the diner was quieter than usual. The air was thick, charged with unspoken tension. The waitress greeted them with her gentle smile, though her eyes revealed the exhaustion of battles fought in silence. She leaned closer to the little girl, who once again whispered her secret. This time, David caught a few words carried by the stillness of the diner. His daughter had told her that she wished the waitress could be her mother. The words struck him like a blade, sharp and tender at once. His daughter had voiced what he had not dared admit, that the woman who served their meals had become more than a stranger. She had become hope, possibility, and the missing piece they never knew they needed. But the moment shattered as the manager stepped forward. His voice cut to the diner like a knife, sharp with accusation and bitterness. He questioned her loyalty, her choices, and her future, making it clear that he would not sit quietly while another man and his child claimed what he believed was his. The waitress trembled under the weight of his words, but then something shifted. She looked toward David and his daughter, their faces filled with both fear and faith, and a quiet strength rose within her. She refused to let jealousy dictate her path. She spoke with a calmness that silenced even the storm of his anger, declaring that kindness was not betrayal, that compassion was not weakness, and that her heart was her own to give. The diner fell into silence, the weight of her words echoing louder than the rain outside. David stood tall, not with aggression but with quiet resolve. He placed his hand on his daughter's shoulder, showing that they were not ashamed of the bond they had formed, nor of the love that had begun to bloom. The manager, unable to sway her, turned away with bitterness in his eyes, retreating into the shadows of the kitchen. The conflict had not ended entirely, but the battle for her heart had been won, not with force, but with honesty and courage. That night, as David and his daughter left the diner, the waitress walked them out into the cool air. The neon sign flickered above, casting its soft glow over them. For the first time, their connection was no longer fragile or hidden. It was something real, born of secrets whispered, of kindness given freely, and of love that had quietly grown despite every obstacle. David looked at his daughter, who clutched the waitress's hand as though she had always belonged there. And in that moment, under the fading glow of the diner lights, he knew they were no longer just two, nor was she just a stranger serving coffee. Together, they were becoming something new, a family built not on what they had lost, but on what they had found. If you enjoyed the story, rate it out of 10 in the comments and don't forget to like the video.